Hello and welcome, everybody. It is 5 o'clock, and you are at the Built Environment Council Committee meeting of June 14th, 2023. I am Councilmember Liz Vogely, and we have Councilmember Ben Zarlingo, Jennifer Gregerson, and of course from Planning, York Stevens Wachta, Planning Director, without the mic on. And we will start with, do I have to say all the things? You're all welcome to attend in person or remotely. Okay. Agenda items, 2024 Comprehensive Plan Update Briefing. I'm going to send it on over to you.
Good afternoon. York Stevens Wachta, Planning Director, with the mic on. Our two agenda topics today, the comprehensive plan update. There is nearly unlimited amount to talk about that, but we only have 1 hour, and we also have another topic that I think is timely to give a briefing to the committee on, which is the accessory dwelling units code amendment briefing. You've heard about this ordinance that came out of the Planning Commission several months ago, and we were reviewing the state legislation and some other things since that time before bringing it to the council. It is ready to go, and this would be the first stop. So we were thinking a briefing to this committee and then seeing how that goes, what questions there might be to kind of design the briefing for the full council scheduled for the June 28th.
I'm very sorry to interrupt you. I'm going to switch seats, much to the chagrin of IT, so I can read your lips better. So
sure.
Continue. I'll just be moving.
Sounds good. So that by way of introduction to the comp plan briefing, that I was planning to spend a little bit less time on that to leave more time for the accessory dwelling units, which has quite a bit of information in it. The comprehensive plan you will have the opportunity to hear about over the next 18 months. So if that is okay, the part of the comprehensive plan that I was going to focus on is the alternatives and the definition of the alternatives to study in the environmental impact statement. We gave a briefing to the full council on this not too long ago. Good afternoon, council member. And we have briefed the Planning Commission on this over the past 3, 4, maybe even 5 meetings consecutively. We will be asking the Planning Commission for their concurrence and on a recommendation to the council on this definition of alternatives, and then we will bring it to the council for your approval before we launch our environmental impact statement work. So a reminder of what these alternatives are. They are representations of different growth strategies over the 20-year planning period. Alternative 1 represents an extension of current plans that are on the books and would provide about 20,000 housing units worth of capacity. Our growth target that was that is adopted by the county based on the regional growth strategy of Vision 2050 at the Puget Sound Regional Council level, pursuant to state law, the growth target is about 39,000 housing units, and so the two growth alternatives, alternatives 2 and 3, increase capacity in the city sufficiently to accommodate that target. So alternative 1 is a representation of our existing comprehensive plan map and the height map and the zoning map simplified into these typologies: high-rise, mid-rise, low-rise, and single-family. And then alternatives 2 and 3 make changes to that in different ways. Alternative, so I'll describe really quickly what the definitions are for these typologies. Single-family residential is existing single-family designations. For the growth alternatives, neighborhood residential is a middle housing compliant growth typology, housing typology that would include single-family detached accessory dwelling units, as well as the middle housing types: duplexes, triplexes, townhouses, quadplexes, sixplexes, stacked flats, cottage style, and courtyard apartments. A whole bunch of different types of housing that are all designed to be roughly compatible with existing established neighborhoods in scale, form, and character. And you heard recently about the middle housing bill at the state level that is directing some of this work, but we were planning on this alternative to study in the environmental review process anyways. Low rise is small scale apartments and condominiums, about 3 to 4 floors. Mid rise would be the top end of wood construction, typically 4 to 7 floor buildings. And then high rise is everything above that, typically requiring steel frame construction, and it's everything above 7 floors. Employment, we are not proposing major changes to where employment, commerce, and other non-residential uses would be allowed. So on these maps, you can see the square hatch overlay. It represents industrial, commercial, and mixed use where it overlaps with the colors for housing. So we took those typologies and applied them differently to growth geographies. The growth geographies that we have are the urban corridors. These are the major arterials that are characterized by the mixed urban zone now, and they have frequent transit services and concentrations of daily amenities. Those are Broadway north of 41st, Rucker/Evergreen Way south of Metro Everett, Everett Mall Way, and 19th Avenue Southeast. Then urban corridor frames are the areas a little bit around that. So maybe let's pop to alternative 2 and 3. You can see a widening of the darker colors around Evergreen Way and Broadway. And that is the smaller of the two geographies is the urban corridor, and the wider is the urban corridor frame. Metro Everett went through a substantial planning process in the late 2010s, and since that is a pretty fresh plan, we did not anticipate major changes to it. But so Metro Everett is the established boundary. Metro Everett frame is a couple of blocks around the boundary to provide a little bit of a transition area to the higher density mixed use Metro Everett. Connectors are the only sort of new geography that we're working with. The urban arterial corridors is something that's in our existing plan. We're just proposing some buffers and frames around it. Connectors are secondary arterials typically. They are provide easy access to the major arterials and the transit service along them. Most of them have transit service on them as well. They often feature historic neighborhood business clusters at key intersections, and they have easy access to everyday amenities and often have some level of higher intensity housing on it right now, although they are all zoned single family, one of the single family designations with a 28-foot height limit right now. These connectors, which you will see on alternative 3 as low rise, that's the only place they show up on these alternatives, include East Marine View Drive, 19th, Madison, Casino Road East, 100th, and 112th. Then we have light rail station areas. These are going to be planned in detail in the coming years. Right now we have circles around them at a half-mile circle as sort of placeholders for future sub-area planning. We are going to allocate some growth to them because we know they're going to develop as significant growth centers. We don't know how yet, and so we'll leave that as kind of a placeholder. Mentioned neighborhood residential, and then we have a couple of special areas that are under master plans. These alternatives will define what we study in the environmental impact statement. We will come back to the council and the public with the results of that. We will run each of these through. If the future was like alternative 2, what would be the impacts on our fire service, water quality, tree canopy, housing affordability, transportation, access to parks, all the different aspects of the environment. So we'll go through these 3 alternatives for all of them and relay that information back. Yes.
May I ask a question at this time? Are annexations anywhere within this future? Because if you're running all three, and what got me was, we'll figure out about fires, like, aha. Not like, okay, services, social, public services will be needed in annexations, but we won't, there will be no data on what would happen if there were an annexation? How does that work, or?
We weren't planning on it. We were planning on tackling annexation, unless told otherwise, right after the comprehensive plan update.
Okay.
It's about all we can do to plan for the city boundaries that we have now. We do have a planned annexation area south of the city. We do joint planning with the county. We have participated in meetings with them and are reviewing the urban core sub-area plan work that they're doing south of there. But for the most part, we're going to focus on the existing city limits. But
Sounds good. I just
Yep.
know that eventually it will probably happen.
yeah, no, we get questions about that from folks on both sides of the boundary that are interested in it pretty frequently.
Okay, thanks.
So the environmental impact statement will come back, and the planning commission and the public will be able to review it and make a recommendation to the council in the direction of a preferred alternative, which can be a mix and match. So think of each of these geographies and each of these housing typologies as kind of ingredients. And once we have the ingredients in here and we've studied and we know what those ingredients are and how they perform, you'll be able to combine them into a preferred alternative meal at the end of the process. We will run that to the extent that it differs from one of these alternatives through a supplemental environmental review phase, and then you will be free to make a decision. It's important to note that something has to be studied in the environmental review process for you, the council, to make a decision on it. So in some sense, it's the most intensive or impactful version of all of this. If it's not on this map, to decide to do it in the future, we would have to go back and study it. So this is kind of an important gate. So if, pick any parcel on this map, if you don't see a color on it, then it probably won't be in the preferred alternative unless we go back and do rework.
Back to annexation question, the county will have done their EIS on that area, so that wouldn't necessarily need to be re-studied if
Right. I
that
mean,
happened.
Right.
And then neighborhood businesses, like home businesses, we had talked about changing up the ordinances a couple of years ago, and then it didn't go anywhere. So when you say something, if something is not on here, does that count as something that's not on here?
As home occupations, we had, if that came through the planning commission, we did environmental review on it at that point. I believe it was a determination of non-significance. So you could use that environmental review for that specific one. We can also add, I guess there's a scale of a change that is very noticeable in terms of environmental impacts, and there are some that are less noticeable, and the less noticeable it is, the easier it is to make that change in the future.
Okay, make a note of it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure, thanks you for the presentation so far. So as far as discussion on where direction the council is gonna go, that process is gonna be after the environmental review process?
For decisions,
For
yes.
decision-making?
Yes. Because you will have the benefit of the information within it.
Okay. And so when we talk about the impact, is that gonna, is that this social services, city services, fire, police? Those types of things are all gonna, stormwater will also be included?
Yep.
Okay,
So middle housing, for instance, could mean more development in areas that are, have been stable for a while, and the stormwater implications of that are gonna be important.
right,
A lot of times the stormwater will actually improve because developments from the 80s and 90s did not have the kind of stormwater quality and quantity controls that new development would need to have,
Or the 50s.
or the 50s,
Yeah,
yep.
yeah, right, like my neighborhood was
Yeah.
developed in the 50s.
Yeah, so we would require any new development to meet the latest standards, but at the same time, at a landscape scale, you're gonna see potentially more impervious surfaces in a watershed.
Now, we had talked about growth protection, or growth projections involving the AMI percentages. And
Yes.
that the county plan is working on. Do you know where we're at on that? The county's on that?
The county has completed their work on the targets. Actually, the meeting in Snohomish County tomorrow steering committee was the
Yeah.
final decision on that.
Okay, did the county adopt that, or is that what the,
The county council needs to adopt the housing total for
Yeah.
the city, but not the
Not the plan.
affordability brackets. Yeah.
okay, so so we did it.
So the
in that-
affordability brackets are done, and we have our distribution of housing that we need to plan for by income bracket.
Okay, so that meeting was important. 'cause
Yes,
we
that was
decided-
the last one,
I,
yep.
I had the impression that the council was somehow.
A small piece of it, the total number, that 39,000, that goes to the county
That
council.
part goes to the council. Okay,
Yeah.
good, thanks. That was why I wanted that clarified. Thank you.
Somewhat related, one of the questions that I get periodically, and I need some clarification myself, is can you tell me that sort of the generation of those growth numbers? Because I know, and we talked about this, I think, at a recent meeting, that some of the numbers that were projected some years ago were well in excess of what we've actually experienced per year. Can you tell me where those, how we got those numbers?
Yep. The State Office of Financial Management makes projections for each county for the 20-year period and 5-year increments within that. Those are supposed to be scientific projections that take into account relative economy and all those sorts of things. Those have been very, very accurate over time at the county level and at the state level. We have a very predictable flow of new people in each county. Puget Sound Regional Council, through Vision 2050, developed a regional growth strategy with regional geographies. We're a metropolitan center, and then there are 4 or 5 other geographies. And through a regional process that spanned 4 years or so, from 2018 to 2021 maybe, worked with representatives from all the jurisdictions in the region and developed the growth strategy that assigned 20% of Snohomish County's population growth to Everett as a metropolitan center. There's different numbers for each of the geographies, and then 39%, I think it is, of the jobs. Then the county, through Snohomish County tomorrow, splits it up between the cities that are in the regional geography. There are 11 cities in the smaller cities and towns geography, so they needed to divide theirs up. We are a geography of 1, so ours was done essentially at Vision 2050. So the state's forecast for Snohomish County, and 20% of that to Everett, that's our number.
Okay.
And as for realizing it, we have to plan to it, and we will work towards it. And to the extent that we don't, it goes somewhere else, because it's fairly predictable that the county as a whole will grow.
So that the numbers predicted for the state and the county as a whole, that prediction has been more on target, but Everett's share of that has not been as high.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
Interesting.
I think the prediction in 1990 for 2020 was like within 1% or 2. It's
Okay.
uncanny.
Thank you.
Okay, so the Planning Commission is taking this up for their recommendation this coming Tuesday. Wanted to give you a little bit of a check-in and a zoomed-in map compared to what you saw at the last council meeting, and we will be back to you in late June or July, I think, for your concurrence on going into the environmental review process.
And the concurrence will be on these versions of this?
That these maps look like good alternatives to study, not that you like one or the other, but that they're a reasonable range and good story for us to analyze.
Was anything And the critical point then was that anything that we would want to have must be studied.
Right, yep. If you wanted high-rise in the agricultural land, at this point, we're not studying it, so it would be difficult to decide on that later.
And that concludes
That
agenda item number
concludes the
one.
first Yep.
Are there any further questions? And welcome, Councilmember Schwab.
Thank you.
And next, it looks like we have in our presence York Stevens watched up for accessory dwelling units code amendment briefing.
Okay, so I've got slides for this one, and I have a lot. Happy to take any questions. I'll try to take a breath and pause for those, but please do interrupt. So accessory dwelling
I'm
unit.
very good
code-
at interrupting.
Great, already there, so you go. So again, this is coming to the whole city council on June 28th for a briefing, and then I think we take a gap or two in there. We'll give you the rest of that schedule, but I think public hearing July 12th. Thank you. So an accessory dwelling unit is a secondary to a principal building. It can be internal and attached, or it can be external and detached. You can see in this graphic from the Department of Commerce, the blue would be the accessory dwelling unit that would be accessed from inside on the top there, or it can be separate and detached. Here's an example from a application that we got within the city that was converting a garage, and you can see on the right what portion of the ground floor would become the accessory unit, and then the rest of the house would be the rest of the house. Here are some examples, some stylish examples from, I believe these were from Seattle's, yeah, it says right there, Seattle's pre-approved accessory dwelling unit gallery. We've gotten a lot of questions about this, and it's something that we would love to have in the future. Pre-approved plans that a homeowner resident could choose from and have a quicker path to approval.
A question, but so I don't forget it later. Yes.
I hit the buzzer first.
Oh, sorry, go
No,
ahead.
go ahead, no, in fact.
Well, pre-approved would not be pre-approved for every site, but the
Right.
design would be approved, and if compatible with that site, then would streamline that process.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and how far along, I know this is a lot to ask, it's like you don't have anything else on your plate. How far along do you think, what's your goal to having pre-approved plans on specific sites? Is it next year?
Probably a
Tomorrow?
couple of years.
Oh, okay.
Probably a couple of years, unless there's some path like a statewide one, which would be a great idea that would facilitate it.
It would still have to match the certain criteria of the lot. And obviously, you can't create a streamlined plan for every alternative of property, so.
Right. We think this would help in some cases, but I don't think it will be a complete game changer because sites are so different and people's preferences. It's
Right.
hard not to even look at one of those and say, well, what if I move the stairs over here, and then you've lost your pre-approvedness or something.
Right. So that's the difficulty in trying to do this. And-
Yeah, but it can't hurt.
No,
anyways.
it would be, so maybe I might jump to the conclusion, or jump to your plan here, but are there specific areas that the city has studied that can predict or project that there's gonna be ADUs in this type of lot? Or is there this type of area of the city, this type of
Yeah.
zone?
We've seen them. I've got a slide later on recent history of ADU permits, and of
Okay.
course, we're changing the rules, so that would change, but we've seen them in every zone and in
Okay.
every type. That's one of the benefits of it, is that it's so flexible,
Okay.
that if you can dream it, you can almost make it
So
work.
there isn't any real specific part of the city where
Right.
they're being built?
Alley lots are easier, but we
Okay.
see plenty on non-alley lots too. Alley lots because you can either convert a garage or you've got easy access from the back and.
Thank you.
I would imagine that other jurisdictions, Seattle and North especially, that have some pre-approved plans like that, I would think our situations topographically and in terms of streets and alleys would be relatively similar. Is there an opportunity for a kind of an interim set of solutions to adopt some of those if that might bring it a little bit sooner if we've got good demand?
Right, yeah, that would be one of those things that could make it earlier if we could. I know Renton has some, Seattle has some, if we could just purchase the licenses for them, for instance.
Yeah, and if I remember right, the way Seattle worked is that the applicant would purchase that plan from the architect. So I would imagine that the architect would be happy enough to
Right.
license to
Right.
us. Okay, well, we can look at that.
Yeah,
Thank you.
so we'll look at some shortcut options to put those out there.
And considering this is a code amendment briefing, we're going to have to say yes to ADUs eventually first.
A first step would be, yes, although you could do pre-approved with our existing ADUs too, yeah. Definition in the RCW, a dwelling unit located on the same lot as a single-family housing unit, duplex, triplex, townhome, or other housing unit. We're gonna use a slightly different definition from that, but same gist. This is our existing definition. It draws a distinction between the detached and the attached, and we are proposing to drop that, the 1 and the 2, and simplify it to this proposed definition here in the ordinance. A dwelling unit which is subordinate to a permitted principal dwelling unit or units located on the same lot. Pretty simple. Basically, it just means that you have a primary and you have a secondary. There are other conditions, you'll see later that the ADU needs to be under 1,000 square feet, for instance, but this is the basic definition. I'm going to skim through this policy guidance quickly, but at the state level, years ago, there was an accessory dwelling unit bill that passed that encourages cities to authorize accessory dwelling units. Now they have upped the ante on that, pardon me. Brand new this session, and we gave a briefing to the council on this not long ago, but the city must allow 2 accessory dwelling units on all lots that allow for detached housing and meet the minimum lot size, must allow ownership segregation, may not require owner occupancy, may not limit roof heights below 24 feet, and may not have standards for ADUs that are more restrictive than for single family.
So, yeah, question about that. I'm really encouraging ownership of housing. And we've, on a separate note, you know, the whole deal with the condominium laws and the liability laws that we have here in the state. And I know we've had some changes to that, right? That was 2-story, was that 20 units?
Yep, 12 units. Yep.
12 units? That was just a side note for those who might be watching. What about the possibility of separate deeds to the ADU? Is that part, I know it's here, it says ownership segregation, that's a little different, or is
That's it, yep. So right now, we prohibit ownership segregation. So if I wanted to sell either by condo or fee simple, my accessory dwelling unit city code would prohibit it. We were proposing, actually, just about everything that's in the state bill was in this ordinance before the state bill was passed. Maybe they borrowed it from us, who knows? But allowing that ownership segregation is part of the ordinance.
So that's a separate deed for that portion of the, now will there be a joint usership of the shared space then, like parking
Yep.
and yard, and that will have to be in there?
Yep. I think most likely would be a condominium declaration that would establish private parts and joint ownership
Yeah.
parts.
Yeah,
So you could do any different way. You could share the yard, or it could be my yard, not your yard. Same with parking and walkways and things like that.
okay, and now the city will be accepting that. Is that a process that the city's gone through when someone's like changed to townhouse or duplex? I mean, I'm sure your office is probably familiar with that process, and
Yeah, we're not involved in the condo process.
Okay.
So we would permit it as one lot, and we would continue to see it as one lot, and the condo is
it'd be up to the
recorded
ownership to go
the
through
county.
that process through a consultant or
Yep.
their own personal research or whatever, yeah.
Yep.
Okay,
And there are, I think this came up at a council meeting, I think it was you actually, were suggesting that we have a program to facilitate those kind of ownership
Yeah.
opportunities by supporting folks with standard documents and things like that.
something that might be easier for
Resources.
us too to deal with, if we give them something
Yeah.
that your office can work with.
Right,
Might be some benefits to a little extra work there.
right, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, thanks.
I guess that's something to take some real care in, because it's complicated and we don't want to accidentally or backhandedly create an alternative path for short platting.
Right.
Because this wouldn't be then effectively 2 two pieces, it would be one piece, but with a condominium ownership where you would need I think you described the ownership of what would be shared, what would be separate, and, I mean, I do think the condo, we don't really do co-ops here, so the condo kind of structure is the way to get at that, but I suspect to do it well, we are gonna have to think about a lot of eventualities and specifics, and guidance for our community members.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great. Vision 2050, Puget Sound Regional Council, provide a range of housing types and choices, sufficient supply to meet the needs of different households, expand housing capacity for moderate density housing, and streamline development standards and regulations. So this ordinance implements all of those regional policies. There's a regional housing strategy, and one of the strategies actions in there is to reform single-family zoning to increase opportunities for things including accessory dwelling units. Our own comprehensive plan, promote a wide variety of choices for safe and decent housing for all, promote housing alternatives, and accommodate well-designed infill housing that protect the character of the neighborhoods. These are all policies that we designed the ordinance to implement. Rethink housing, action 1.1 right up front, promote accessory dwelling unit development through changes to regulations and processes. Here we go. A whole series from the state on down of policy recommendations to do this. Here is a dashboard that we have online that folks can track over time. I've had to update it 7 times since we started this project. In the last couple of years, I think our data on this dashboard starts in 2021, we've approved 52, and there's another 10 or so under review right now. The majority are attached, so within a housing unit, and less detached. And what else?
By attached, do you mean wholly or mostly within the current building envelope, or are some of those expanded building envelope?
Some of both,
Okay.
and we have had our standard for being attached which comes with some looser regulations in certain ways, has been a substantial connection between the two. We've had some kind of silliness with breezeways and put some plywood and now, it's just part of the reason why we're proposing to drop that different lanes for attached versus detached, because people were getting around it by putting some plywood between the two. And then you see on the map there on the right side how it is sprinkled pretty consistently throughout the city, and in all zones we've seen them.
There's none in Silver Lake.
You're right. Yeah, Silver Lake is
Good at
a
you, District
different
5.
kind of a lot pattern. It may be more consistently developed in a certain way. It could have. Yeah, I'm curious. Yeah, that's an interesting observation.
There has been a lot of development in the past 30 years or so, fairly consistently, sort of under one regime of development, so that may be why.
Right.
Because there's a fair amount of multifamily there, but there hasn't been it just doesn't have that stretch of older housing.
Right. Yep. This is where folks can find that. If you go to everettwa.gov/maps, there's our map gallery, and then under other interactive maps and tools, you can see the ADU dashboard and a couple other nifty mapping tools there. These slides will be available as PDF after the meeting. So as to how many we might see, this is what our analysis turned up as kind of a prediction. We have about 20,000 parcels in the city that could be a candidate for ADU development. We had 18 and 24 in the last 2 years, and previous comprehensive plan assumed 470 accessory or infill dwellings over a 20-year, which is 23 per year, which is roughly in line with what we've been seeing. Seattle did a very comprehensive analysis of their ADU regulations, and they modeled how the changes, which were very similar to the changes that we're proposing, beginning and end, and they estimated that over 20 years, 3% of the parcels would build one ADU without the change, and that that would double with the change, which just like ours would allow 2 ADUs per lot. And the estimate was 828 per year, and they permitted 890 in the next year, so it seemed relatively on target. So if we have 20,000 parcels, if you took that, let me see, what was it? I think it was 3% per year. You would see potentially an increase. We would expect ADUs to be, they're a very popular kind of development. We would expect it to increase over time, maybe up to 50 per year in 2035. And maybe with the changes, we would see that nearly double to 90 per year by 2035, average over the period of 69 per year. If that were to be the case, and 4.5% of the lots in the city developed with accessory dwelling units, here's what that would look like on this area. You can see the green circles kind of, or green squares kind of appear. And then there's a couple blue squares that would be attached, and that is 4.5% of the parcels that are in the screen, 8 ADUs. I'll make it turn again. Oh, I added a wiggle. Here's North Everett. Interesting, this is the same scale, so you really get a feel for the different types of lot patterns that we have here. This is what that could look like under that rate. Oops, that one I did not have a wiggle. So you can see that this is not transformative. There's a couple on each block maybe, and this is over a 20-year period. Now it could be more or less than this, of course, but that was our best guess.
In neighborhood meetings, I've heard not so much concern about the quantity, but sometimes the compatibility with the pattern of development and the architecture in the neighborhood. If I remember right, the proposal was to remove design standards on this, so there really would not be you could build anything that was compatible with the regulations.
That is correct. We've been trying for a long time to go towards more objective design standards because it gets our planners out of the hot seat of having to interpret what is consistent and say no to a developer, and you're always going to make somebody mad. So we were trying to get towards that. We had proposed removing the design standards. That was definitely a topic of interest with the Planning Commission and with the public. We kept trying to find something that worked, and I think you remember hearing some of this. We had a proposal from one of the planning commissioners that we were actually thought was workable, and it was to pick one aspect of the neighboring house, the principal dwelling. It could be the roof shape, it could be the siding, it could be the window trim. Just pick something to make a connection. And so we had written it into the ordinance as an after the planning commission addition based on the conversation. The state passed a law that said no different standards for accessory units than for the principal unit, and no subjective design standards. So you could say everybody must have a pitched roof. You would say that to the principal. If you wanted to rebuild your house, you would have to have a pitched roof in the accessory dwelling unit, but you could not differentiate and say something like we have on the books now must be architecturally similar, or I think it's even more than that. It's like must visually match the principal dwelling. And some of the struggle we had with that is, what if the principal dwelling is not a looker? Do you really want to match that? Or maybe it stands out from the other houses on the block. And then of course the subjectivity of it was challenging. So we took that back out because of the state law. With this, and we had a great long discussion with the Planning Commission about middle housing, which is going to be a very similar kind of a discussion. Same kind of neighborhoods, same kind of new development, same kind of hope for it to be architecturally or otherwise consistent with the scale and character. And the question is going to be then, what standards? The only way that we can do it is to have the standards apply equally to accessory dwelling units, rebuilt houses, and middle housing. So if we want to find, you must have a front porch, you must have a pitched roof, you must have modulation between the floors and all those sorts of things. Right now we have very little to no design guidelines for a single-family detached house. So that would change, but that would be the path to addressing design.
And that would, I'm sorry, that would apply to all units then? One for all? All
Yep,
for
we could
one.
either go one for all or none for all.
Okay, thanks.
Historic overlays importantly are exempt from that. So we're proposing to continue design review on accessory dwelling units and middle housing, sorry to be hogging the
No, you're-
table,
it's-
in those overlays.
And those overlays already have the requirements to a detached dwelling, so,
Right. We
Those-
expanded it just a little bit in this ordinance to cover, I think there was a size limitation on when it would go to the Historical Commission for design review that we removed and made it all, and any accessory dwelling unit that's not wholly inside an existing house would go to design review. And we have a couple in process right now.
I have a short story. Just considering all of this, my daughter was using Google Maps the other day and just randomly going around Everett and found a house that she thought was a friend's house. And I'm like, nope, that's on Grand, our friend's on Walnut or something. She's like, why do they all look the same? Like even the colors, there is no difference. How boring. And I just had to put that out there for all of the historical people. And I also enjoy a nice Victorian home. But, haha, not everybody does.
That is definitely a challenge with design is different folks have different opinions about it for sure. All right, I'm going to go through the aspects of the proposal. The definition we already covered. The zones. Right now, accessory dwelling units are allowed in any zone except the mixed urban zone. The proposal to the Planning Commission was to remove the light industrial zone from that list. The Planning Commission, on the last day of their consideration of this ordinance, voted to recommend also removing the UR4 zone from that. And then subsequent to the Planning Commission's recommendation, we were looking at the business zone, and thought that that also did not make sense for accessory dwelling units. I've heard no complaints about the light industrial or the business zone, but the UR4 zone, you've received, I think, some of the public comment around that, some concerns. But before I continue.
Yeah, I was just thinking of ADUs above businesses. I mean, we're still trying to even get 4 floors and a corner store type stuff, which we don't really have, but what's my question? Do we already have folks that live above their stores? And then could there be more living space above stores? And this would take that out of the possible equation. And same with light industrial. But maybe I just don't understand exactly what exactly goes on in light industrial, but why not be able to live there too? We're not in the industrial age anymore. Yeah.
So 2 important points for all this. Each of those zones, maybe not the light industrial zone, but the business zone and the UR4 zone permit other types of dwellings. You can build, if you had a store and you wanted to build a unit on top of it, you could do so, and we would just call it a dwelling. So this isn't going to change that much. The same goes for the UR4 zone. If you have a house and you wanted to add an accessory unit, we could call it a duplex, and you could achieve the same thing with one difference: parking. An accessory dwelling unit requires 1 parking spot, and a duplex requires 2 per. And there are folks who have purchased property who are intending to build an accessory dwelling unit attached to a house in the UR4 zone. They cannot fit the extra parking, and they're designs would be thwarted by this ordinance. I think you've received comment letters, and I would expect you to continue to hear those comments at the full council stage. So I wanted to daylight that as an issue that we should think through.
Is a parking space defined as for a car that's Costco-sized or for like a bicycle? Could it have a bicycle parking spot?
There are reductions for parking, but they're more difficult for the smaller scale than for the larger scale.
Will any of those parking restrictions change, or will we be studying changes to those parking restrictions with the comprehensive plan, so that the extra parking you need with a duplex might be different a year from now, a year and a half?
I think so. We talked about that with the planning commission, and I think there's broad agreement that, that we don't have room for all that parking, or money for all that parking.
Can you, in terms of the sort of trajectory in the number of vehicles per resident over the past, say, 20 or 30 years, is there a trend in that? I mean, one would hope it trends down, but I still see a lot of vehicles on the streets and parked outside of, for example, apartment complexes and stuff. Do you think that's changed?
I don't know the trend, but I know that we have more 0 and 1 car households than we have 0 and 1 bedroom units. So we require more parking than we have cars in the residential area. I just ran some numbers on that, and unfortunately,
It's really interesting, it's 43% of
of the households.
households have 0 or 1 cars.
Right, there you go.
And I was like, almost wanted to pull up the census, because I didn't believe it, but I trust you, so I did it.
From the American Community Survey of the census, yeah.
So, question about the UR4 zones. We've had some discussions about allowing different types of densities. And matter of fact, our last council meeting, the council decided to go, not give incentive to a lower density type structure. And in essence, allow the exemption for just the higher amount of units. So does that have any, I mean, this is the planning commission reviewed this, was that under some of the discussions that really for the UR4 areas, it should be a denser type of housing unit, not someone trying to hang on to the last house in the middle of this. What we need is a high concentration type of structure.
That is exactly why the planning commission recommended to pull it out.
Okay.
In code, the purpose of the UR4 zone is to provide for multiple family residential use at high densities.
All right.
And we have a minimum density for that zone of 3 units per lot. We have allowed accessory dwelling units, despite that minimum density, to be added to a single house because it is bringing that house closer to conformity. On the other hand, by adding investment into that house, you make it less likely to aggregate with its neighbors into a more substantial development. That said, again, the UR4 zone, and I have a whole packet on it that I'll share with the full council. There are a lot of, it's a very varied zone, and there are a lot of places that you would not expect. You see an entire row of houses on both sides of the streets that are well maintained, and you don't expect that in the next year or two, those are going to become a large-scale development. So it is kind of a question of some housing now that is very valuable, potentially reducing the chances of more housing later, but maybe not.
And the difference, can you summarize the difference in UR4 and UR3? I think that was I can't remember now, but.
It's a little bit about setbacks. There's not much difference.
And not a big difference in the intended density then, more about?
It's a little bit less density for the UR3, but the way that we run our density at that scale is with the height map, and the height map is disconnected from the zone.
Oh.
So you can have, there are a few UR3 zones with a higher height limit than some UR4 zones. So the UR3 versus 4, I think, mainly operates on setback and potentially lot coverage limits. I'll have to look at that again. So you will hear comment about this, and I just want to pass along that we are, this was not, the UR4 was not in the original staff recommendation to the Planning Commission. It was a Planning Commission recommendation. It sounds reasonable, but it is a difficult decision. So I'll give more information on it to the full council, and that's something that you may want to take some particular attention to. Number per unit, right now we limit it to 1 accessory per principal unit. Proposed is 2 per, and those graphics are just another version of what I showed on Everett, showing what a scenario could be. Maximum size on the left for these next slides is going to be existing, and on the right is proposed. Right now, there is a somewhat complicated formula that takes into account the size of the principal dwelling and if it's on a duplex, triplex, or single family. We're proposing to simplify that to a straight 1,000 square feet. No maximum if it's totally within a large house, for instance. Lot coverage, we're proposing no change to this. In the single family zones, the lot coverage by building, this is not impervious surface because parking and other hardscape does not count towards it, only buildings. The limit is 35 or 40% lot coverage, and you currently get a 5% bonus for the accessory dwelling unit that you wouldn't get for the principal dwelling or for other accessory structures.
But that does bring up then one of the considerations in terms of impervious surfaces other than the buildings and our goals for tree cover and those kinds of things, and some potential conflicts and trade-offs that way. And I suppose maybe, I don't know, maybe pervious pavements are also another thing that might be able to be counted less toward impervious surfaces. Because I know the park is doing that on the Silver Lake Loop Trail. There's some pervious pavements there. Okay.
Yeah, the stormwater would need to be handled, but that, to be honest, that dwelling unit in the backyard might come at the expense of a tree.
Yeah.
Now, it could plant a new tree to replace it in the front yard or on the street or something, so we have a whole tree canopy program that we're working on. But that is
Yeah.
going to be an impact here.
Okay.
So the two things on the bottom just show an example of what 34 and 43% look like. And we're proposing no change to this in this ordinance. So you're not always going to be able to fit 2 dwelling units on every lot. Height, again, a little more complicated on the left. Existing, if you have an alley lot and a detached and a steep roof, you get 24 feet. If it's a flatter roof, you get 18 feet. If it's an attached, you get 28 feet. If it's a non-alley lot, if it's detached, you get 18 feet. If it's attached, you get 28 feet. Proposal would be 28 feet on an alley lot, 24 feet on a non-alley lot.
I'd ask why, but we're on a time limit.
Simplification and a little bit more flexibility.
I meant why shorter on a non-alley, but
Oh,
please.
yards, generally that if it's in the backyard, then across the fence is someone else's backyard, and alley lots, it's generally overlooking the alley. Setbacks, there was an interaction between the height and the setback there, so rear non-alley lots was 20 feet, except you could be down to 5 feet for if you were under 18 feet high, and same thing except the 24 feet to match the height. Parking, existing 1 space per unit, and you can reduce that when all 4 of these conditions are met. Proposed would be 1 off-street space reduced when you're within a 1/2 mile walk of all-day transit. And I've got a map on the next page that shows what that is. Oh, here's some images of street parking in the city. More full and less full. These are the bus routes that currently meet that standard of all-day transit service. And then this is roughly a half-mile walk. This isn't perfect, it's done with GIS, but in South Everett, you can see roughly the areas that would have a no parking requirement, and then almost all of North Everett. The state law had some rules on parking that were no parking within a half-mile walk of bus rapid transit, so this is a little bit more expansive on that. Worth noting that the Planning Commission recommended no parking virtually citywide, and staff thought that that was not consistent with the comprehensive plan and not quite ready for that. Not to say that we need more study before staff would be comfortable with that. So we did reverse the Planning Commission's recommendation on that.
I guess that may be one thing to make it kind of explicit in this, is that a lot of us share an idea of where we may be 50 or 60 or 70 years from now, but we are also not there today, and we got to get there, and our community members have to be along with us for that. So I think that makes some sense of a kind of a progressive thing, even if we aren't striking to the ideal right away.
Kind of a middle ground for now. Design standards, right now, visually match, we require one street side entrance and then matching the siding, roofing, windows, all of the above, and we would remove that. No longer require owner occupancy of one of the units, but do allow ownership segregation.
Which brings up, I guess, another thing, and I don't remember the specifics of this, but that would be potential regulations around the creation of these things as short-term rentals. I forget where we are with respect to, I mean, because that's one of the concerns that community members have expressed to me, is creation of ADUs or multiple ADUs or the whole site with 3 dwellings, all as short-term or rentals.
We did touch short-term rentals, but only, I think, to like a technical correction. Short-term rentals. Yeah, you would be allowed to. Right now, our existing regulations on short-term rentals, you need a business license. No more than 2 may be operated by any individual, group, or corporate entity. And no more than 8 guests on a site. And so if you had the principal, so that's the change that we made. It used to say 8. We want to clarify on a site. So if you have a house and 2 accessory dwelling units, you can't rent them all separately with 8 people on each. You're limited to 8 total,
Okay.
enforced by complaint.
Okay, so there is that stays largely as it has been.
Yeah.
The restriction, okay.
And so that's no more than 2 ADUs per
ownership group.
ownership in the entire city?
Yep, that's our existing regulation.
Okay.
Enforcement by complaint. That's it.
Questions?
Good timing.
Now, if only I can ask this question, can I? Just kidding,
I'm good,
okay.
because we asked all our questions as we went. Thank you for your patience and good work with the presentation.
Yeah, no, this is really good. Glad to hear all of it, and thank you for your time and consideration to detail.
And then the slides
Mike.
here, you said oh, sorry, the slides you said would be available sometime soon online?
Yes, I'll send them right away, and they go on to, is it Granicus, or the place where you watch the videos, the Agenda Center, and you click the little drop down next to the meeting, and you will have both the PDFs of the maps that we shared, as well as the slides.
Very good. You are on top of it.
Thank you, York.
I don't, that's a couple minutes.
5:59.
Okay, that's exactly the time earlier. It's 5:59 and we end at 6. So, I will just read pending possible future agendas: Everett Mall Way traffic calming, project labor development work, related mayoral directive update and progress. We'll be in touch, and gonna end this meeting now. Thank you.